I had to have the conversation with the client saying, we need to undo this. And they weren't going to be reimbursed for that. So they were paying to basically have the work done in a shoddy way, then pay us to rip it out, and then pay us to redo it. What's up, guys? It is episode 11, and first and foremost, I wanted to shout out Firm Grip Gloves. Someone's phone is dinging. Is that mine? It was. They sent us a bunch of their gloves. They reached out on Instagram and had said that they wanted to send us a healthy package of different gloves. So I'm gonna put these in the office for the guys to try out. But I want to give them a quick shout out and just as a thank you for doing so. Let's get into it. So we have a couple questions this week. Number one, I'm gonna read it here. I recently saw a post you made about a project you took over partway through construction. I've been receiving many calls this past year from people who have seen our work and want to have us take control of their partially built homes to bring them to completion. I'm nervous to place a fixed cost estimate on a project I didn't start with and would have to deal with many caveats and conditions to cover myself. Do you handle jobs like this as an open book or a fixed price? Any advice is greatly appreciated. That's absolutely open book, time and material. As most of our projects are some sort of cost plus or time and material plus fee, we're always open book. It's just the way we operate. But in this case, you absolutely, in my opinion, need to be doing this completely open book and being very upfront with it. I can touch base on a couple different stories. One, we're actually starting a project just in the next couple weeks. We hired a new project manager and he's gonna be running this one. And it was a project that was framed, plumbing and electrical, I would say probably 65-70% complete on rough. And the communication was an issue, and the client wasn't getting the reciprocation of what they wanted back from the builder and the contractor, and it was just a battle, and they had issues. It's in a condo building, so they had issues with the contractor damaging common space areas and making a mess and not being respectful to the neighbors when they were doing demo. There's just all of these things that led up to them making the decision to ultimately hire another builder, which we had done a previous project for them, and they reached out and I said, of course, we always want to work with a repeat client. And I walked this project, and it's, my first thought when walking a project is like, all right, how much can we keep? And I'm gonna pause on that project and think about our Com Ave project, which you guys are following, which is the one that probably you're referencing. That project, I walked and I thought the same thing. How much can we keep? And we tried to keep as much as possible. And I remember, we started with framing and we went around and we started outlining expectations, that the walls and the floor and the ceiling need to be super flat. Their expectations of flatness was at the top of that chart. So we knew that, all right, we need to go around and we need to make sure that all the studs, all the ceiling strapping is all plumb, level, flat, and then taking strings and making sure that they were coplanar across the entire surface to make sure that when we got into plaster, don't ask me why we plaster over drywall. Everyone asks that. It's just what we do. When we got to the plaster point, it had to be, we had to be delivering a 10 if we were gonna expect the 10 from our plasterer. So looking back at that job, we realized that ultimately we spent a ton of time, which equals money, in reframing. And then we look at the plumbing, it was the same thing. We were trying to get the plumbing to a certain point, and ultimately we had to let go. Another part of this, I'm sorry I keep derailing, is we actually acquired a couple of the previous subcontractors to basically try to get them to complete their work on that project. And ultimately it just didn't work. It wasn't a good fit. We weren't meshing. We were trying to communicate a different level of expectation than they were comfortable with. And ultimately we just chose to kind of cut ties. And even though we spent the money and we sat down with the client and understood that, we were in a position where, we tried to manage expectations. We really tried to get them to produce at a level that the client was going to be comfortable with, and that we were comfortable with, and it just wasn't happening. And in that case, in a lot of it was due to subcontractor error. But there's always the argument, well, we're the general contractor, we're supposed to be managing this, it's our job to manage. So when, we went back and said this is going to cost more money because we need to undo some stuff again that we were overseeing, I made the concession that we were going to take, there was a portion of that we just didn't bill for, and that portion was a lot of our overhead and profit on part of that. Now, that might be wrong in your eyes or right. It doesn't matter. It was my choice because I looked at it as this was an opportunity that we probably should have cut ties sooner. And we didn't because we were genuinely trying to make it work because that was in the client's, which we believed was in the client's best interest. Ultimately, it wasn't. We cut ties, moving on. Going back to the other project, the new project coming up, I walk through this job a little bit differently because I have the experience. So now I'm looking at this job and I'm like, all right, can I keep everything? I'm looking around, I'm like, well, the framing is all number 2 stud. There's, it's cut up. It's not frame. It doesn't look like some of these walls are plumb or square. The way they strap the ceiling is kind of funky. It looks like they've framed some walls that were probably on the plan that way, but in the space just didn't make sense. And the client's already spent probably, a couple tens of thousands of dollars at this point, if not more. And I had to have the conversation with the client saying, we need to undo this. And they weren't going to be reimbursed for that. In fact, they were going to pay double because we need to undo it, more than double. We need to undo it and then do it again. So they were paying to basically have the work done in a shoddy way, then pay us to rip it out, and then pay us to redo it. So they're paying two to 3 times the cost for that one task of framing, and not to mention the fact that wiring and plumbing was 60-70% done. That has to be taken out and redone too. And I remember walking around that space, it's like I really wanted to save as much as I could, but at the end of the day, I knew from experience from the previous job that we'd put so much work and time into that we're ultimately going to save time if we rip everything out and start over. And that's not always easy to see in a project. And and that's why I related back to that other project, the ComAv project, is because I didn't see that. I genuinely thought we could get through that by saving and kind of just tweaking some of these things, and we couldn't. So that hopefully answers the question as to, how do I foresee that in going into a project. But I think I'm gonna keep going, Doug, with this one. You cool? Mm-hmm. I walked another job recently, and this one was really frustrating. Multiple millions of dollars that this client was going to pay for this home. I mentioned it on the podcast, the Modern Craftsman, but multiple millions of dollars that this client was going to pay for this home, and financial issues came up on the builder's end or the investor's end that was investing in the property or something like that, and they had already signed a P&S. They had money shelled out for the deposit. They were trying to get the home to completion. The builder was in trouble financially, and the client reached out because we had done work for a friend of hers and said, can you just walk this project with me and just tell me I'm not crazy. Tell me that this home can be fixed. Tell me that we, could I hire you to finish this home? And I remember seeing the listing. I'm like, man, it's a beautiful house. And I said, sure, can you just send me the list or the list of what you want done? And I remember her sending me the rendering. And one of the first things I know, and I don't want to get into too much detail because I know it is local, but I remember seeing the rendering and then looking at the photo of the home and being like, there's a lot of things that in that photo of the home don't match up to what the home's supposed to look like. Material selections, all of that. I get on site, I walk the job, and I'm looking around. I'm like, there's just so many marks that were missed, and things as crazy as the driveway wasn't wide enough for you to turn into the garage. And I'm not sure how you missed that one. You're spending a couple $1 million and you have to do a 3-5 point turn to get into your garage every time and then get out of it. And it was wild to see things like that. And I remember walking through the house, and it was just like the finishes were just, they were trashed. Like all these brand new windows, it was, they were installed and they were pre-finished from the factory, and they were just getting damaged and beat up on. And it's like none of this stuff is protected. And then it's like the flooring was cupped and there was filler everywhere across the entire floor. And I'm like, what is going on? And come to find out, it wasn't climate controlled. And I'm going through the house, and it's one thing after the other. And then there were design items that were just poorly executed or not thought through. So it really ruined cased openings and windows and doors and tile. And it was just 6 or 8,000 square feet, and it was just one thing after the other. And I remember getting down to the mechanical room, and the brand new hot water tank had a giant dent in the side of it. Like it must have fallen over being transported into the basement. And at that point I was just like, listen, I understand the investment you have with this home. I understand that. Could we come in here and make this beautiful? 100%. And we would, and she'd asked me if I knew what it would cost, and I had thrown out a number so quickly and so high that I knew I could almost walk away guaranteeing that it was going to cost that much money because of the amount of work and the size of the home, and really looking at a brand new home that I was probably going to have to fully gut just to be comfortable with what had went wrong in that home to begin with. And I explained to her that this was a home, we could absolutely make this beautiful, but there were the issues that I could see made me nervous for the issues that I couldn't see. And even if we stripped it back down to the stud, would it continue, would we continue to find these issues? Would there be structural concerns? All of these things just kept running around my mind, and I had made the recommendation to walk away. And that was a tough one. And I actually, thought about it for a couple of days, and I had reached back out and I said, I don't want to just give you I don't want to only say walk away from that, because ultimately if that home is really what you are hoping it is and really going to be, if it's almost everything you want except for the quality of work, if we're willing to work together, we can make this home, everything that you want. It just, we have to be transparent. And going back to the question, we couldn't do that on a fixed cost because there's so many underlying issues that we don't know about yet, and we needed to go into that with the understanding that this was going to be, peel back, investigate, and repair. And that's why if someone is hiring you because they genuinely believe in the value that you bring and they want you to take over a project, then they should value you enough to understand that this is going to be an open book project and you guys are going to work collaboratively for an end goal, and do that so you aren't taking a risk to not only not make money but put your name on something that could ultimately fail. So this guy reached out and said he heard my story about how I started off with myself and one guy. And since you've grown, is the first guy you started out with still working for you, or did your growth kind of push him away, meaning that you both started remodeling and once you took more of a business side, did that kind of make him want to walk out? Neither. So I started the company. I actually started the company myself. I'm going to answer it relatively quickly. I started the company. I was working for a big developer building high-rises. I was an assistant project manager on a high-rise project in Boston. I wanted to do carpentry. I started my own company. I was going to be one carpenter and just do all the work myself. I loved working with my hands. I took on these projects, and I did a whole home remodel for an architect, and that's when I had to hire someone because I was doing the entire place myself. It would work 12 plus hours a day, and I was doing everything. Like, there was no other carpenter on site. It was just me and my subcontractors doing plumbing and plastering and painting and things like that. And I think the first person I hired was my cousin. And it was just like, he needed a job, I needed help, I wanted him to come work for me. I worked for my dad for 11 years. Family's tough to work with, and ultimately it just didn't work out. And then I hired my brother. Very similar situation. It really didn't make sense for us to keep working together. After that, I had hired a good friend of mine, Brian, and he had worked for me for a number of years, and same thing with my friend Chris. Brian was, EMT. He was trained to be a firefighter. Training to be a firefighter, and ultimately, he was burning the candle. Honestly, not at both ends, like both ends and the middle. He was an EMT at night. He was trained to be a firefighter and working as a firefighter and working for me on his days off. And it got to a point where, like, we started butting heads because I knew this wasn't what he wanted, and I ultimately just told him, I was like, listen, dude, you need to go do what you want. I'm firing you because you need to go after your passion, your dream. Like, be on the fire department that you want to be on, that you've been striving to be on since you were a kid. And I pushed him away, and I did so with complete love in my heart, because he's actually on the fire department now, that he had always wanted to be on, and I am super pumped to see him there. Similar with Chris. Chris was a good friend of mine. He was a machine operator, excavation, site work, and we had talked, like, he kind of wanted to get out of the company he was in. I needed help. I had offered to bring him in. We talked about possibly opening a site work division and having him start his own thing, and then, like, kind of building his company up, and then, like, splitting apart and then working together as a sub. And unfortunately, it just didn't work out that way. We were grinding. He was working for me as a carpenter and laborer, and he great friend, but same thing. I knew this wasn't what he wanted to do. Like, it was fun working together, but I ultimately knew that this wasn't the path that he wanted to be on. He wanted to be in a machine. He wanted to be in site work, and unfortunately, when I had let him go, it was bad for our friendship. I think we both became really quiet. We both matured a lot in that time. And, now he's actually going to be working on, he ended up going to work for a friend of his that does site work in concrete. And in just a couple months, you're going to probably see him on one of our videos. He's going to be back on our job site. We're working together. We're friendly. Like, I don't think we ever weren't friends. I think it just was a tough split, because anytime you're faced with firing a friend or family member, it's tough, because you don't want professional life to come into personal life, and it always does. And I think that's probably a discussion for another day. And I'd love, if someone wants to ask a specific question, make sure you do so below. But that is, I made those decisions to separate myself from friends and family working with me, because I knew I was putting those people in positions for a career path that they ultimately didn't want. I was doing it because I needed people to work for me, because I needed the help. And instead, when I hired Mike, my first and oldest employee here, that's when I realized that there are guys out there that genuinely want to do this, that can be part of this team. And and as of today, I think we did the math, we're up to 18 people, which is amazing. It's crazy, but it's amazing. But that would be my advice. That's not even the question anymore. But my advice for hiring is really work with people that genuinely want to be in this and have the same values, and kind of forecast what they can forecast what they want in their career, and that aligns with what you're looking to build your business around. I'd actually love to dig into that more, but I know we're short on time. So guys, if you guys have a question, make sure you comment below. Shoot me a DM. But honestly, comment below is way easier. Doug tracks them, and we can answer them on next week's episode of Coffee Break. As always, you can listen to this on iTunes or any of the podcast apps. Check out The Modern Craftsman on any of the podcast apps, and we will see you next week.